Hello, hola, buenas a todos. It is the Chancleta Generation Podcast.
It's Friday morning. You're like way caffeinated. More caffeinated than I am.
So much coffee, yes. All right, so I am Clemencia, and I am a Latina business owner and founder of Moyer Studio, which is an advertising agency that speaks to Latinos in an authentic way, because what other way would there be to do it?
And I'm Cecilia Dircid, an environmental and social justice practitioner, Latin American immigrant from Guatemala, community weaver. ¿Cómo estás, cariño?
Muy bien. ¿Tú cómo estás? ¿También caffeinated como yo?
A little bit. There was less this coffee for me this morning.
Well, I actually haven't even finished my coffee. You know what happens? Sometimes when I'm tired, I get like overly hyper. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, enough about me. So today's topic, I'm so excited to talk about this because it's way overdue. We haven't done something like this before. We talk about a lot of things, but one of the underlying common denominators of all the things that we talk about is identity, finding our way into belonging and loving ourselves for who we are and what we stand for, right? It's like, I feel like this is the underlying thing that we always talk about. What makes us Latinos? What makes us Latinos? Is it, a common language that we all share? Many people think so. So with us today to talk about this and unpack the really small topic of what defines us as Dr. Aisha Cort Hamilton. Welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to talk with y'all today.
So Dr. Cort is an assistant professor of Afro-Latinx Studies and Social Movements in the Latin American Studies program at Bucknell University. She earned her bachelor's in Spanish from Yale University and her master's and PhD in Spanish literature from Emory University. So she just knows just a little bit about languages. Just a tiny poquito. Un chin chin. Her research focuses on Afro-Latinx and Latinx film, literature, and cultural production with a specialization in Afro-Cuban cultural production. So cool. So cool. She is also the author of the forthcoming monograph representing race in revolutionary Cuba, Afro-Cubanía, Negrometraje, and cultural production 1961 to 1996. She's also an entrepreneur and runs Viva la Lengua language courses and cultural immersion tours in Havana, Cuba, Oaxaca, and Tulum in Mexico, and Barcelona, Spain. Wow, that's so cool. Via her company, Hey Dr. Cort. I love that name too. Love it. She's also the founder of Vela Negra. You got the best names.
I'm good at both.
Which is a candle and home fragrance company inspired by her Afro-Cuban and Guyanese heritage, and her entrepreneurial ventures have been featured in Telemundo, Good Morning America, R29 Somos, Hip Latina, Allure, Martha Stewart Magazine. Yes. Another amazing Latina here in this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excited to be here with you guys. Excited for this conversation to dig into this idea of language and Latinidad and how we navigate it all, especially in the US where it gets dicey sometimes.
Very.
Yeah, where they're like, you gotta speak some American here.
And nobody knows what American is, which is also
correct.
But we have all the time to talk about this.
Yeah, so let's talk about it, because, Latinos have been here for a while, from the beginning of this country, and many don't speak Spanish. The language has been lost, throughout generations. Parents don't teach their kids Spanish, or for many different reasons, which we'll get to. But it's like, does that define us? Does that common colonial language define us?
In short, no. And I teach language. I think that language is important for you if you think it's important for you. right? A lot of people feel that they need to speak language, Spanish, in order to affirm or prove that they're Latino or Latina enough. But in truth, that's one part of this whole Latinidad identity and cultural expression, right? I'm gonna start going on a tangent, so you may want to stop me because I was.
Yeah.
Please.
Well,
no. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Ceci.
No. I was just gonna say, like, I think that it couldn't be better that we're recording this episode today. There was a research that came out of Pew a couple of weeks ago, in which it was about like is language. It was called like, do Latinos think it's necessary to speak Spanish in order to be considered Hispanic? And this is problematic to me in many ways because it's conflating two things, the term Hispanic and Latinidad, which are like two very different things. And they say like the term Hispanic and Latino are used interchangeable for this report. And they're not. Like language matters, and those two words have very different meanings. So, and then he said like 78% of U.S. Hispanics say it's not necessary to speak Spanish in order to be considered Hispanic. But like the whole the word Hispanic means Hispanohablante. That means that you speak Espanol. And
even people
Latino
from Spain are Hispanic.
Yes, so they are Hispanohablantes. They, some would say it's Castellano, but like Espanol. And a lot of people from Latin America have Spanish as Clemencia started as a colonial language, have it as a colonial. Spanish is their second or third language. So this conflation of the two terms, if they speak Spanish at all, some of them, if they come from, I know from Guatemala, a lot of members of the indigenous communities who come to the United States, not really having a lot of fluency in Spanish, but in their Mayan language, when they come here, they might jump right into English. They might find it a better transition, but they might look very much similar like me, and have a lot of Guatemalaness in their ethnic identity. So to me, it's just interesting that the two terms have been conflated.
It's dangerous,
and they still do. It depends on the area in the U.S. Latinos call themselves Hispanics. Like in the Southwest, they call themselves Hispanics, and that's in the terms. And I work in advertising, so it's like when we're trying to like connect with them, we gotta say Hispanic because they consider themselves like that. It's interchangeable to them, but also I think in certain communities they do feel that Spanish defines them as Latinos. So I think it's all like in the eye of the beholder, right?
So I think it's kind of dangerous, like what you were saying, Ceci, the conflation of the terms Latino and Hispanic. If you're going for the sociological definition, Hispanic is related to linguistics, right? Whereas Latino is more related to geography. And then you consider the cultural background, but that means a lot of times if we do that conflation, we're leaving out Francophone speakers, we're leaving out countries for me that I consider part of Latin America that linguistically don't fit in technically, like Belize, the Guyanas, right? To me, I consider them Latin American countries, also Caribbean, but you can be two things at the same time. You're leaving out very important histories and identities when you just kind of jam everybody together, right? And what you were saying, Clemencia, about regional, right? On the West Coast, you have to talk about Chicanos, right? And the same thing with Midwest, Chicago, whereas on the East Coast, not so much, just because of the way the population disperses. But we talk about Chicano studies, Puerto Rican studies. Did I just lose my train of thought? I think I just lost my train of thought. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so tired. Oh, I'm so sorry. Now this you may have to edit out. Okay.
We need some more coffee.
No, but you were saying the regional. We have like in the West Coast the Chicanos. You have them in Chicago area and Midwest, but like not in the East. And I think that is historical background too. Like when you think of those areas, they used to be part of Mexico until a certain amount of time. So they, they didn't cross the border crossed them. They were one day one side and the next time on the other. So like they that's I think we cannot lose historical context of how it showed up here. And Latinidad is compleja, no? Like it's problematic for for many folks, because exactly leaves them out. And where is the space to carve? Do you belong to these communities where you interact or where your families are rooted?
That was the point I was trying to make. When you start talking about East Coast and looking at migration patterns, immigration patterns, because immigration, migration are, to me, are two different things. East Coast, you start seeing Spanglish because it's third and fourth generation, right? You have people who still preserve indigenous languages, maybe in the Southwest, West Coast, right? Spanglish is very prevalent on the East Coast. And it's like, yeah, I'm Cuban, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican, I speak Spanish at home, or maybe you don't speak, you respond to certain things, you know those words like ven pa acá, siéntate, like lo que sea, right? You have your go-to. But if I dropped you off in DR, again, what you hear in New York, Boston, Philly is not what you hear on the island, right? It's two different worlds. So that's a whole other thing. Like, a lot of kids are raised here, even if you are speaking Spanish or some semblance of Spanish or Spanglish, the US amalgamation, morphology, morphing of language is very different than when you go and spend your summers in country. Because a lot of times you'll be like, wait, what? Okay, go. Like that's not what's happening.
Yeah.
Because
and you also brought up a really interesting one, which is Puerto Rico. You know, Puerto Rico has also adapted so many English words, like hanguear. El hangueo, vamos al hangueo, which is like they turned a English word into a Spanish word.
Big shot. El bichote.
Del bicho. Oh, is that what it means?
Bichote. El bichote.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was like a big bicho.
Bichote, big shot. Big shot, bichote.
Bichote. I didn't know that. You learned something. But yeah, it's like it's even the opposite. But they have made that theirs, right? Like, this is part of our language now, and it's like, it's not incorrect. It's just the way that they're handling being colonized, right, by another country.
And identity too, because the regionalisms that we have in country, taking it out into diaspora, that is very reflective of the experiences that people are having, moving in between these spaces, existing in that ni de aquí, ni de allá space, of trying to balance, like, a lot of times when it comes to language, if that's what people think is the element of Latinidad or your phenotype or something like that, that, again, we know that Latinidad is a range of expressions and visuals and all that. But if you get stuck in that, then you're looking like, okay, well, I'm not Latino enough for the Latinos. I'm not white for Americans or American enough for Americans. I'm not black enough for the black. Like, ni de aquí, ni de allá. I can't go to the island because I'm not Puerto Rican enough. I'm not fully American because I'm not fully American. Like, you're always floating in these in-between spaces. And I think the languages that we create, the modes of communication that we do adapt and morph into our usage, create spaces for us to kind of flow through and channels for us.
Yeah. I mean, I remember going to Colombia when I was a kid, when I was already living here in the US. And, I would either, like, they would tell me, like, you're not from here, right? Because your accent doesn't sound like you're from here. I'm like, oh. And then, it hurt. It hurt me. And then also, I would, like, sometimes lose that word in Spanish, and then I would say it in English. They were like, oh yeah, la gringa. And yeah, so it's like, so then you start going like, okay, so I don't belong here in my own country where I was born, but I also don't belong in the US because I don't speak American and I speak with an accent. And so it's like, you start, from when you're really little, you start going, who am I? Where do I fit here? And it's like, so you try to grab onto anything to feel that sense of belonging. And there's so much shame around language. When you ask people, I ask, sometimes we're in a meeting and then, like, we're talking, like, with clients and whatever, and, we're talking about a script that we're writing in Spanish, and then I, somebody's like, oh, well, I don't speak Spanish, and and they're Latinos, but they say it in like such a sense of shame, like, oh yeah, I don't speak Spanish, and you're just like, it's okay, you're trying to make people feel comfortable about it, but there's still shame around being a Latino and not speaking Spanish, and it's like sometimes it's not people's fault. It's not like they were like, well, my parents didn't teach me. I wish. Many people say, I wish I did.
It's, I'm sorry, Ceci. Do you decir algo?
No, I was just thinking a lot. It's just like, I think it's a very U.S. thing. I think like the idea that you should, that I'll flip it. I think that the idea that being a U.S., like the United States has taken so much space in the world, right? Like historically, like they become America. I don't call the United States America. Like America is a continent. I was born American, and I'm from Guatemala. And like if in any other place, I'm American. So I'm in the United States, but I was always American, right? Like so, it's the idea here that in order to that their colonial project also of erasing in native languages here and other cultures here was through language. And the United States doesn't have an official language. Like Guatemala has an official language, the United States doesn't. And also, so it's this idea, but being pluricultural or plurilingual, bilingual, multilingual is something that happens in Europe. Most people learn 3, 4, 5 languages. They hold the brain, and we know that from neuroscience, right? Like the brain, that the word defines what is possible, and the more languages you have, the more possibilities exist for how you can create and see the world. So it's so phenomenal, the insistence to something that is so limited, the attachment that exists, cultural,
just one language,
to just like, this is what we speak here. And I was like, no, you've always spoken other languages. There is native people here who are still holding to their languages, who are still trying to revive them. You did not manage to kill them, like the colonial power, the empire. And the desire of, like, for me, having, like, I grew up, like, in Guatemala, having that value, like, it was very Eurocentric. It wasn't about me learning a native Guatemalan language. It's about me, like, am I going to study Italian or French or German or English? Like, what other foreign language am I going to learn? Japanese? But for me, languages is just like, there is nothing more fabulous than moving to a different space and being like, oh, I can communicate. I come from a different place and we can connect because I know how to say thank you and good morning and where is the toilet.
Yeah, but exactly, like, for Latinos, that's also a sense of, like, you walk in, they say buenos dias, and then you immediately, oh, you're Latino too. You know what I mean? Like, you got the little Latino circles or, like, whatever. So it's like that you also cannot connect with people like that.
But it's interesting, like, my brain just flashed to something like, I am a Black Latina. I'm Black. That is how I present. That is who I am. I'm also Latina. Sometimes I have the flip-flop conversation, the flip experience. I walk into a space that I know is Latino. I may open my mouth and speak in Spanish and I get greeted in English. So it can also be used to exclude, or like that litmus test, like, do you actually speak? And it's like, yeah, te dije buenos días. Like, ¿qué te pasa? And then, like, once they understand, like, you see the walls, you visually see walls come down, but it can be annoying as well. Like, I got over a long time ago feeling like I had to prove my Latinidad. Like, Spanish was my first language, even being born and raised in the US. I don't have any problems with that anymore. When I was younger, yes, I felt like I had to say as much as I could, or, oh, is this person saying whatever? Like, it was a defense mechanism as opposed to a community opener. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's just interesting also now when I see people who come to me for, like, language classes and stuff, especially heritage speakers who you grew up with Spanish, you may not produce it, or that shame that you were talking about around not being as good in the language as you think you should be, or your family thinks you should be. working with them through those. A lot of it is mental blocks and things that we put on ourselves with the help of society, helping them work through those things to just like, look, language is yours. Language is always changing. It is whatever you need it to be. The point is that you communicate, and you communicate in 50 million ways with and without words. So we're just gonna flip the switch, change the channel, and do more of that in Spanish. So let's see what the base is and then start building it up and build the confidence and the interior mental stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. Language is whatever you want it to be, because it's something that, you know, I also think as Latinos, we have, like we just talked about the Puerto Ricans, we have evolved our own languages, in Spanish, Spanglish, you know, and Spanglish is something that is ours. Like Latinos in the US, we have Spanglish. That's something that's ours. Like, you know, we've gone to use it in our own countries and they're like, what? Or even in Spain, you know, you don't say Microsoft, you say Microsoft. You know,
I say
it's not it's not Spider-Man, it's Spider-Man. You know, it's like Spider-Man. It's not white. It's not white. El hombre. Yeah, wifi.
El hombre araña.
El hombre.
Yo digo
el hombre
wifi.
araña, sí, el hombre araña. En Colombia era el hombre araña. In Spain es Spider-Man. Es Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
El Spider-Man.
Pero
But that's el Spider-Man. That's also the pronunciation of things, right? Like how we pronounce it. It's like.
But the English would tell you that the United States don't speak English, like they speak American. They don't. I mean, like, but pronunciation, like that's an issue of language, right? Like if the French will tell you that the Haitians or like the French colonists don't speak French, right? Like, but they do. Like they and language is
evolving.
Language is not. It's ever evolving. It's always evolving. We come from Latin roots and Greek roots, and those languages have, like, you know, exist. Some people read them, like, but they're mostly dead, right? Like, and there's a zillion. I think for me, the beauty of language is there's so many things that once you learn another language, you can express, and there's so many things that exist in other languages. And I love it what I love about Spanglish is when I can exactly have a word in English that describes what I want to say, and I know the person on the other end, if I put it in my sentence in Spanish, understands that.
Yeah, there are things that
because
don't have
the words
translation.
in Spanish don't have it.
There are things that don't have translation in both languages, like in English and Spanish. You know, or like that word. You remember that word that people were talking about? Like it's like a Nordic word that it's like comfortable or whatever.
Hygge.
Yeah, something like that.
Hygge. No sé cómo se pronuncia.
Yeah, like people were just starting to use it because there's no translation to it. And like also like in Japanese, like things have like words that just don't translate to anything. But also in Spanish, there are things that don't translate to English, and you're trying to describe it, but you know, it's not that you gotta describe it in a phrase, not in a word.
Yeah.
So, Aisha, a question as a professor, you're using your professor hat. Why are we, when you see your students, when you see people come in, why is it that language holds that identity for so many young ones? Or like, why is it, you know, I was looking at that Pew research, like when Clemencia's comment about like shame, and it says 54% of the Latinos interviewed said that they have felt shamed by other Latinos for not being as good at speaking Spanish, or like, so that's at least a little over half of the population have had that experience in which someone has shamed them.
It's a lot of shame.
You know, so when you see your students, is just, I would say, the assimilation process in which people wanted to make themselves in proximity to that whiteness, and like make themselves you know, even if we cannot look whiter, can we speak whiter? Sound whiter? Is that it? Like, what do you think? When you see your students, what are some of the barriers? What are some of the dreams, aspirations of, like, because being multilingual is just phenomenal.
And that doesn't happen that much in the US, or not as publicly or as widespread as it should be. Like, a lot of people like to travel, but not everybody speaks the language. They expect everybody to accommodate them. And I think that is shifting, at least in the tribal community, I'm seeing that. But in terms of my students that I work with, I think for them, language equates community and belonging, or a point of entry into a community or some place to be when, you know, you're like, where do I find my people? How do I connect? And language, again, like you said, that buenos dias, it can open doors. And even if it's blocked, if you keep it going, bringing down the walls to like, oh, okay, we can find some point of commonality. Again, like I said, I don't think that language is everything, but for people who feel that way, like I think about my own family. My mom came over with my uncle in the 60s from Cuba. They spoke Spanish. When my uncle got here, I think within a few months, he told my mom, like, don't speak to me in English in front of my friends, because he was getting made fun of. He still had an accent. He was trying to learn English and fit in. And now he doesn't speak Spanish, right? My other two uncles who were born here, they made the decision not to teach them Spanish deliberately because it was the 60s. They had moved from Boston to the South, and it was safer to just be Black, right? And
wow, it's safer to be Black than to be Latino.
And this happens in a lot of families, right? Just assimilation, it's safer. And it was safe at that time in the 60s and the 70s, again, depending on where you're living, to just remove that element that would give you an accent, that would make you a little bit different. And maybe it was still spoken at home, but that's for the house. And again, it's still a community and it's still a belonging, right? But I remember there were times, like when I was younger, we spoke Spanish at home with family or in community, like our church community, our little corner of Fields Corner, right? Which was Cape Verdean, Puerto Rican. We had some Cubans, some Dominicans, but in those little spaces, in certain stores, with some Panamanians, with some Honduranians there. And then when you go to school, I remember my mom I had a little accent when I was younger, my mom correcting my English. And I'm like, you don't speak English. I couldn't say that out loud, but I'm like, she's like, no se dice así. I'm like, what do you mean you don't speak? How do you know? But I speak, when I'm paying attention, I speak English without an accent, more or less, right? Is Boston, a little bit of Caribbean when I get tired, but I can turn it on and off. But she was deliberate about that, and I didn't understand it at the time, but it was safer, right? So then when I switch, it's like, oh, wait, you hold on. Where did that come from? It's like, siempre estaba ahí. Siempre estaba ahí. But like you said, there's that little hint when you go in country that like the English like has slipped into the Spanish, right? You take like a week or two and then you kind of flip back to like, okay, that's a Cuban swing. Like it's going to.
Yeah. My husband says that every time I talk to my mom, I get the Cali accent because I'm from Cali. The Cali accent once again, but like when I'm talking to him, I'm more of, because he's from Spain, I get more of the, you know, the Madrid kind of thing, and then, you know, you switch back. Or sometimes, you know, when you're hanging out with Venezuelans, you sort of start like talking like Venezuelans, and then same thing with, you know, with Puerto Ricans, you know, you start like sneaking in those little things, and that's fun because you're trying to sort of like relate to them. But you know, to the point that you were making, you know, yes, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, I remember it was not safe for us to speak Spanish or to have accents. You know, now that we're sort of turning the tables, maybe, you know, speaking Spanish is an act of defiance. It's like, you know, no, I am keeping my identity. I am keeping my culture alive with me. And I am going to, you know, even if I don't speak Spanish, I'm going to make sure that my kids speak Spanish because we are who we are and I'm proud of it and I'm okay with this. So it's sort of like, you know, so language is also doing that for us.
I like
right?
that language as resistance because I think that's what the swing around is, right? You know how we like swing the pendulum? I think it's swinging back to like, hey, no. This can be a part of this, and again, if it's a part of your identity or something that you consider important in this day and age, it is an act of resistance, especially like indigenous languages that aren't really widely spoken outside of regions. Like I'm hearing a lot of people like go and courses being created for like Haitian Creole, right? Which is, I believe it's written, but they're starting to like document it better and teach it, as opposed to just being an at-home community language. It's like, no. This is not going to be not a secret language, but we are here, and this is the language that we speak, and we're not going to try to force ourselves to speak proper or speak the way the colony wants. Like, this is what we speak. This is how we speak. Go forth, right? Even with the Spanish.
Yeah. And even names, right? Even using, when you give your kids names, it's like, oh, you're going to name them all, like American names, or are you gonna give them some names from your culture?
Yeah.
Like indigenous names or African names.
Yeah.
So that's also very interesting. The expression of your name.
That's true. Yeah. Name holds a lot too. Becoming not that Ted or Fred or Brian is bad, but I don't know any Latino Brians, right?
You don't know any whose name Usnavis?
I know like
Colombia
two.
conoce a Usnavis. I know a bunch of Abraham Lincolns or Jeffersons. I know in Colombia there is a lot of Jefferson, Usnavis.
Oh, Jefferson.
Usarmis, yes.
No. Usnavis, I know two Usnavis.
You say Usnavis.
Yeah. U.S. Navy.
Colombian. Yo conocí muchos.
U.S. Navy. Usnavi.
Usnavi.
Yeah, maybe we need to do an episode about names, because that's also we could talk about this for hours.
Yeah, but my names are Arabic. I'm Aisha Zakia, and that's from my dad. Like you said, the importance of traveling, Ceci, and language, and he's from Guyana, which is a former British colony. Grew up speaking English, but studied Spanish and French. Lived in France in the 70s with Algerians who were doing their revolution, and all of us have Arabic or African names, so that's where my name comes from. And then Cort is Dutch because the Dutch also colonized Guyana at a certain time, so names are important. Yeah.
But I think that for me, maybe because I grew up in Guatemala, and a lot of my identity comes in Spanish speaking, and I learned English kind of here, and I'm fortunate enough to have learned English in my 20s and to have captured. I learned my third language, Portuguese, in my 30s, and I'm functional in it, and I understand it a lot, and I aspire to learn two more. Like, as I hope that I have enough que me alcance la vida. But like I'm interested in language. Like I like them mainly because they help me understand the world better, and because there's many benefits, health benefits to being multilingual, like neurological. They develop. You have less data, because I love data. Like data shows that you fight less Alzheimer's, less dementia. Like people who are multilingual have way better they age better. Your brains age better. You're always creating better neural paths. You are there's an enormous amount of benefit, physical benefit and mental benefit to being able to speak more than one language. So also, I think for a long time owning my accent. I remember one of my partner's best friends was a speech therapist growing up, and I remember asking her once, it's like, so do people take a speech therapy to get rid of their accent? And she was like, yes, I work sometimes with people, but she was doing it for children, for people who needed to learn to speak in general, right? But she's like,
I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that when I was younger. Yeah.
She was she asked me, she's like, why are you asking? I said, I don't know, curious. She's like, you're not trying to get rid of your accent. And I was like, oh no, I was like, I love my accent. It's fine. I'm okay with it. And I know it has softened over the years, and sometimes I listen to myself. When I go to Guatemala and come back from speaking a lot of, or if I've been speaking a lot of Spanish, I feel like my English gets it harder. Yeah. But when I have only been here speaking in English, it softens, right? But I think being foreign I wasn't other, I was foreign. And because when I was in Guatemala, I was always, excited to meet people from other places because I couldn't leave, but they would have stories from other places that I was excited about. So I think it's a very different mentality of like being othered, but just being from somewhere else, and we can learn from each other.
I mean, I love that, and I wish that everybody thought it like that. But sometimes it's like there's something about human, like it's just, as much
otherness.
as like as much as we crave belonging, it also can be used as a weapon, right? Like you don't belong here, and it's like, and they're not saying you don't belong. They're showing you just because you act different, you speak different, you have an accent, and those are the ways that you are not belonging. So it's like, as much as people crave to belong, they also crave to like exclude the ones that they don't think that belong to them, just so we can be like, we're here in this little group, those people are this other group. And so it's like, the sense of identity and belonging is like a beautiful thing, but it also can be a really uncomfortable thing to feel. And like I said, I also tried to get rid of my accent. I was looking for coaches to try to get me to like lose my accent for a while, because it was hindering my my job searches, my even like when I would call to try to get an apartment and they would hear my accent, and like there was just so many different things that I found obstacles in because I had an accent, that I was like, okay, maybe I just need to like fork over some money and try to get coaching to get rid of it. How sad is that?
Oh man.
Yeah, now it's like whatever, but yeah, it's I'm sure that people do it all the time.
Yeah.
But then when you were talking about being multi-language, I always remember, I don't know if you guys saw this movie called Arrival, and it was like these aliens that came over and they had this language, and apparently like I'm not gonna spoil the movie, but basically it's like if you learn their language, your brain structure completely changed, and it made you like see things, and it was so cool, because that's sort of how it feels like when you know another language. It's sort of, you have this little window to a different structure. Like I lived in Amsterdam for 4 years, and I was trying to learn Dutch, and Dios mío. But because their sentence structure is completely different from ours. It's like all the verbs go at the end, and they're conjugated differently. The plural is different. So it's like it was really, really hard to learn, just because it was so different. But also, I feel like learning a completely different language really gives you a lot of insight into the culture, or like how like we've talked about Spanish or English script writing, right? And in Spanish, everything is always longer.
Yeah.
And it's like, and in English, it's a very economical language. You could say things in 3 words, and it's like, but it says a lot about the culture, right? It's also like, we're very, very practical, very like, quick, and like Spanish is also very poetic and very, we take 3-hour lunches in Spain, and like, so it, if you take a 3-hour lunch, you can afford to have a really long language.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you bring that up, because like my writing in English, I used to get in trouble for this because I write very, very long sentences in English, and I'd never understood like where it was coming. It's from the Spanish. Like a professor was like, oh, a sentence should never be more than 1 line long. I'd have sentences that be like 3-4 lines, and it's the same thought. And I was like,
I'm
what is in there? Like, what do you mean you don't know what I'm saying? But
put a comma in there. Don't you love the comma? The comma is like the best thing. Like that's like run-on. Like people be like run-on sentence. Like what is that run-on sentence? Just there's a comma
here. The thought is still going. It's not running on. It's one whole thought. But that's one of the things with language, right? Like you said, English is do get to it. Spanish and other languages, it's like, entonces el hombre estaba diciendo, yo pensaba cuando yo estaba disertando sobre la cosa ese, like I'm still talking.
there's a lot of context into what we're saying, right? We're giving context, and I was thinking, and I was saying, and they were doing, and they were blah, blah. There's context.
I like that. It's true.
It's really colorful.
So it gives you a lot of insight into cultures, and also just how the culture works. And so, so this is like, as much as like, okay, nobody should be shamed for not speaking a language, but also, guys, if you can afford to learn languages, please do. And because it's awesome. And if you can afford to have your children learn more languages, amazing. There's so many bilingual programs for kids now, because like your kid's brain will develop in a completely different way, and they're gonna get so much out of it. So like, and also assimilation sucks. Just don't do it.
It has long-term consequences, I think. And this generation, I don't think the dangers that were there for the older generation exist in the same way. So it is safer to do that exploration, to let your kids explore, to let them have those experiences, to something that you may have lost yourself as a parent, to reclaim that. Now I feel like if that's what you want to do, you can. I'm hearing about like these kids who call themselves no sabo kids, and I was like, what's no sabo? And I was like, no sé. And then I was like, oh, that's why it's no sabo, because you don't know that it's no sé. I never heard that.
No sabo.
Yeah, I never heard that term until maybe like a year ago. And I'm teaching a lesson on it next week, and this idea of language and Latinidad, that they're inextricably linked, and it's like they're kind of mutually exclusive. Like if you want to join them together, you can, but one is not indicative of the other, and one does not necessitate it doesn't work like that, because again, there are so many other things. But if you want it to be for you, that's fine.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because like if somebody comes up to you and they identify as Latino, let them identify as Latino for whatever reason. Like it's already hard enough to identify yourself as a Latino here in the US. It's dangerous sometimes. So if somebody wants to identify as Latino, please empower them. Like it doesn't really matter if they don't speak Spanish, if they are named Jennifer or John or Brian or what, and if they look white, like whatever, just let them, like it's already hard enough to identify as Latino.
Identify and like race, and then you put in other intersectional identities, and it becomes very complex and complicated. And it's something that you cannot put, like you just said, you can't put that on somebody else. You have to figure that out for yourself and how you define yourself, and then be around people who are going to be like, okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And wherever you are in your language journey, that's also great. And if you wanna say, oh, I wanna learn Spanish, that's also awesome. But there's no I
got you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a matter of like letting people like, get in their journey and like be proud of it. Be proud of that they might want to learn Spanish, and if they don't, that's also great. But like it's also great that they want to identify as Latinos, because like I said, for a long time we couldn't. For a long time it was dangerous to do it. And so it's
to the like 80s. So before that you were white, black, other. I don't even know truthfully when they put American Indian on there. So
I mean, in the census 2 years ago, there was no Latino in the ethnic groups.
Yeah.
Or like mestizo, or I checked the box, and other I put mestiza.
Yeah, the questions that they have there, like, and we talk about this in class. I'm teaching this Latinx peoples in the U.S. class this semester, and we talk about the census. We spent a whole week talking about who's included, who's excluded, what happens if we shift, even with the idea of them conflating Hispanic and Latino, right? Yes, it's there, but who are you excluding when you ask the next question and you break it down by race, but not all the options, using the term Hispanic and Latino interchangeably? Like Hispanic is one thing plus country. If you don't mention certain countries or regions, what about Equatorial Guinea, right? They're Hispanic, but they're not Latino. You know, like there were all these things. I know you can't include everybody, but now there's the question of turning Latino into a race. And I'm like, no, that's not going to work, because if you do that, then you're Xing out the whole idea of all the actual races that exist under this ethnicity, and you're conflating the idea of race and ethnicity, which are two completely different things. And it skews the numbers, which skews the funding and the demographics, and it trickles out into a very horrible thing. So that is the question now.
But it goes back to the, people having these preconceptions of what a Latino is, and people, it's like, oh, a Latino. Oh, okay. So I have conversations with, people about doing advertising to Latinos, and they're like, oh, well, we have a translator and they do it in Spanish. I'm like, because Latinos speak Spanish exclusively? Is that what happens? So it's kind of like these preconceptions of like, oh, you're Latino, so you must speak Spanish. That's a part of the identity that we're trying to break. And like, Latino can look like anything. Latinos can be anything. We can, and that's the thing that we're trying to learn here in the U.S. That we can be anything we want, and we can create. Latinos in the U.S. can create our own culture in the way that we want it to be, and there's no like one road. It's not limiting. It's actually very freeing. We can be whatever, and it could be anything, and we can make, like you said, we can make language be whatever we want it to be. All right, well, with this thought, we are at the end of our episode. This was such an awesome, as you can see, I can talk about this for hours. I love this stuff. Thank you so much for giving us all this knowledge and all these experiences. Thank you for sharing with us, Dr. Cort. And please, if people want to get in touch with you, where can they get in touch with you?
If you're interested in all things language as a heritage speaker, if you're just learning Spanish, if you're trying to figure out what you want to do with language, if you want to take a trip to a Spanish-speaking country and work on your language in country, you can find me at www.heydrcort.com. I'm on Instagram at heydrcort. If you are interested in candles and you love home fragrance and you want to fill your home with fragrances that are inspired by Cuba, Guyana, Latin America, you can find me online at www.thevelanegra.com or on Instagram at thevelanegra.com. So that's from.
What kind of smells do they have?
So we have fragrances like Aisha, which is inspired by Afro-Cuban religion, Palo Santo, very cleansing, Azúcar, which is inspired by Celia Cruz. It's sweet but grounded. Right? Does that make sense? We have really fragrances inspired by my mom, Juana, by my dad, Papi, by my grandmother, Mima. We have a lot of stuff. And this is Hispanic Heritage Month, so we have 3 limited edition candles for Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. Everything's on the site. We're also have capsule collection at the Brooklyn Museum for an exhibition that just opened there by an Afro-Cuban artist, Maria Magdalena Campos Pons. So you can go in store at the Brooklyn Museum and shop those. I think they're coming up online next week as well. So we're out there.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And thanks for sharing. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias a ustedes por
Muchísimas gracias. This was awesome. Pronto. This was a great topic and great person to discuss this with. And so, if you want to get in touch with us, we are at Chancleta Generation. You know how to spell that. Hopefully, we've talked about this before. We are on Instagram and on TikTok, and then on Twitter it's Chancleta Gen, because they have a character limit. So, and if you like this podcast, please give us a rating, send us a message, share with your friends, give us a 5 stars, please. And thank you very much. See you next time.
Beautiful day. Nos vemos, cariño.